books, but I haven't seen the
Okay,
show.
so I'm not gonna spoil anything if you've read the books, all of them, right?
Yes.
Okay, and?
Oh, I'm just interested in your method. I'm very interested in
Okay.
your method. So
So
I
you
don't
don't-
think I don't even need to know the story.
Okay, so you don't mind if I spoil the story?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I don't wanna spoil anybody who's like, oh, I really wanna see it, but, okay. So, what we're gonna do today is basically look at the author's chart and identify themes in his chart and see how those themes are reflected in his work. And this is fascinating if you've never seen anybody do this, and I'm not the first one to do this. There have been other astrologers who've done this with Star Wars and with George Lucas's chart. I think it was Glenn Perry who did. And so it's very fascinating to see the same themes come up. So, so I am going to spoil the story, just so you know, up until the present books. We are going to focus more on the books than the show, because the show has kind of veered away from the books, and the author is the person who wrote the books, so obviously his themes are going to show up in the books more so than in the show. If you're new to astrology, which it doesn't seem like anybody here is, don't worry that if you see something similar in your chart, it doesn't mean you're going to be like burning children at the stake, having incest with your twin brother. So it's there are multiple ways in which things can manifest. Yeah. So,
She'll say
okay, so obviously spoilers, when people worry about this for the whole show. So we're gonna alternate between how it shows up in his life and then how it shows up in the show. So this is George Martin's chart. And we're gonna go around starting with the moon in Aries, and we're gonna go down and look at each of the planets, and then sequentially and cover some of the themes, the greater themes in the show. Can everybody see this okay?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so let's start with the moon. So the moon in Aries is in the 12th house. And I want to start with what the moon actually represents as a principle. All the planets have principles. And I learned the principles from someone called Robert Schmidt, I'm a traditional astrologer by training. I started off as a psychological astrologer. I use a lot of traditional ideas and methods, and so I will be using a lot of that, what I learned in traditional astrology. So I will be using more traditional rulerships. So the principles that each planet is associated with come from Robert Schmidt's translations of the classical literature. And each planet has a principle, and the principle for the moon is reception. So the sun is selection, the moon is reception. Now, what does that mean in real life? Well, what it means is that we are receiving the world, just like what the moon does with light. Light is very important as an idea, as a concept in understanding the moon and the sun. And so what the moon does is it receives the light from the sun, captures it, and then reflects it back into the world. Now, anybody here have heard of the Gauquelin studies, Michel Gauquelin? In Michel Gauquelin's studies, the moon was associated with writers. It was statistically correlated with writers at the angles of the charts, just like he has, the moon at the angle. And writers of fiction, not, scribes who write accounting manuals, but writers of fiction. And why? Because writers of fiction have this ability to capture the world, reflect it back in literature in great detail. And so that is why the moon was associated with writers, just like it is in his chart. So as a light principle, it has to do with this ability to receive the world, in order to receive the world, you have to be invested in it. So it automatically implies that you are invested in the world. And when you invest in something, you create an emotional bond with it. That's why the moon and reception leads to emotions. So there's this, when you become invested and kind of connected with what you receive and take in, you become protective of it because you're emotionally invested. So that's how the moon leads to this idea of protection. So we get from reception to emotions to protection through the moon. And that principle is abstract in its most abstract form as a principle, and then in its more psychological form in the human being as emotions and protection. When you're closed off to the moon, when you have problems with the moon, some kind of affliction, particularly from Saturn or Mars, it becomes difficult to become emotionally connected to things or emotionally invested in things, or even to, the receiving principle implies inability to listen or to see even, or to pay attention. So it has to do with the mind as well.
That's true in transit as well, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
And actually, I know a person who, I've actually heard of other people, it's not the first person, who has a Moon-Mars cazimi, very tight, and they have a lot of difficulty listening, hearing. It's the listening or reception principle is cut off. So, so the moon, in life, the iconic moon is the mother. Why? Because the mother is the one who must protect the children. So she is emotionally invested, right, and must protect. She's a protector, which is what the moon ultimately becomes when it's very attached. Has anybody seen the movie Bird Box? That movie is a great example of moon, of a lunar archetype, because when you first meet the character that Sandra Bullock plays, she's depressed. She's cut off from the world. And she, the whole movie is about these alien invasion, and in order to survive, you have to be blindfolded, otherwise you end up killing yourself. So it's this idea about, and she only becomes emotionally attached to things when she gives birth to a child. And so she has to protect these children, and she learns this lesson even while being blindfolded. So it's about closing off, but discovering that you were closed off. So it's a really good...
It's a relatively new one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just looking it up. Okay.
Yeah, it's new, it's on Netflix.
Okay.
It's really good. So it's great if you want to learn principles from popular fiction, which is what we're talking about. So, okay, so the moon in Aries in the 12th house. So let's talk about Aries. We talked about the moon. What is Aries? Aries is the first sign. So it always automatically implies fresh starts, beginnings. Aries, because of when you're born, so the fresh start is the birth, when you're born, everything is difficult because you're a newborn and you haven't figured things out yet. So you're automatically put in a survival mode in a contentious environment. Usually when you see Aries, every sign represents a need. And the reason it's the need that it represents is because something is lacking. And usually with Aries, what's lacking is individuality. You're just born, you're coming into the world, and so you have to create your own individuality and survive as an individual being. To do that, as a newborn, it's hard because it's new. So the need for Aries, wherever you find Aries on your chart, there's usually fresh starts involved, but there's also a need for independence and autonomy, because that's what individuality is. It's independence and autonomy from the greater whole that you've just come out of through birth. So when you find this principle, the moon is being receptive in this type of environment. Now let's get to this 12th house. What is the 12th house? The 12th house traditionally is the house of exile. Now, where that idea comes from, it's also the house of hidden enemies. And this idea comes from